Audio recording for this meeting has begun.
Okay, I would like to introduce everybody to today's speaker, Patrick Shaw. Patrick is an associate and licensed clinical social worker with over 20 years of experience as a senior healthcare director. Most recently, he was the director of learning and organizational development and behavioral health services at Northside Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. Patrick maintains a private practice in Lawrenceville, Georgia, and is an adjunct professor for the University of St. Francis and an associate professor for the University of Phoenix. So I would like, now Patrick is going to share his presentation on achieving your highest priorities, challenges, and a roadmap for success.
Okay, Leslie, thank you for the introduction. I look forward to spending the next hour and a half with everyone, and we'll get started in just a second.
There you go.
Okay, this afternoon's presentation is Achieving Your Highest Priorities, Challenges, and a Roadmap for Success. Many executives are adept at creating goals and strategies. However, many organizations fall short of accomplishing their goals, not because they lack a good plan, but because they fail to execute it. What separates great companies from good companies is great companies have a disciplined process that allows them to identify the most important goals and accomplish them amidst the whirlwind of competing priorities. And our seminar this afternoon is going to talk about a four-step process that helps each of us as leaders identify the most important organizational goals. Secondly, find the critical elements to accomplish them. Thirdly, learn the tools for engaging employees. And fourth, implement a model for establishing a culture of personal and team accountability. So again, reviewing our objectives, participants will understand what separates great companies from good companies. Participants will learn how to stay focused on strategic goals within the whirlwind of day-to-day priorities. Again, if you look at your typical day, you have a lot of different things going on, as well as strategic goals of the hospital and trying to get both of those things done. We'll review writing specific goals, identifying the critical factors for success, developing scoreboards to track our success, and then finally reviewing a model to instill individual and team accountability. So as Leslie said, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and I look forward to being with you this afternoon. So let's talk about execution. What is execution? Execution is the discipline of getting the most important things done. It's not about getting everything done, but getting the most important things done, in this case, the goals. And also, execution requires discipline. So Ron Sharon and Larry Bossy wrote the book, Execution, the Discipline of Getting Things Done. And what they found is the number one reason organizations fail is poor execution by leadership. It's not because they don't have a good plan. There are lots of smart executives in many different organizations crafting strategic plans, but there's a failure to execute. And many of you probably may have been a part of developing strategic plans or be part of accomplishing them. But what the two authors found is execution falls down, or the accomplishing the plan falls down because of a lack of execution. Great executives, however, great executives require defining great execution requires defining where you are today and where you want to be in the future. And we define that through our mission, our vision, our strategy, and goals. And all four of these are aligned, and we're going to go into more detail about that as well. That's the plan or roadmap for greatness. Ultimately, who has to do what to make that happen? It goes from the C-suite executives down to the frontline employees. So that's what we mean about closing the execution gap. There's a plan that goes from the top to the frontline employee. Everyone knows what that plan is. Everyone knows what their part is to execute that plan. And then the organization has the opportunity to achieve its goals. So closing the execution gap, Stephen Covey, who's the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and many others, says, it's one thing to come up with great strategies and goals, but it's quite another to actually get them done. This is called the execution gap. In fact, I heard someone on TV the other day talk about something similar to this, and she said that, you can get very motivated and excited and jazzed up after listening to my presentation today, and you're going to have a lot of commitment or willpower to do certain things. You may say you want to lose some weight, or you might want to say that you're going to spend more time with your family. You're going to go to church more often or read the Bible. But all those things fall down if we fail to execute. Willpower will only take us so far, and that's exactly what Stephen Covey is saying. So why is execution so challenging? 2 reasons. Anytime you have a goal, it requires a new level of performance. It requires new and different behaviors. And if you think about it, new and different behaviors require us to change, and change is difficult. Think about some things you've taken on over the years, and I'll give you some examples. When we first learn to drive, that's a new skill and behavior. It's difficult. It's frustrating for those of us that learn to drive on a 5-speed or standard. You remember the number of times you stalled a car. Or think about if you set a goal to lose weight, or you know someone that has. The new and different behavior might be getting up earlier to exercise before going to work. It might be saying no to the Ben & Jerry's ice cream in the freezer. Or those of you that might actually be in school now, that requires new and different behaviors. You may have less time to do some leisure reading now, whereas that is something you've done before because you need to spend more time focusing on the class that you're in. So execution, one of the reasons is so challenging, it requires new and different behaviors. And if you think about it and think about your own lives, change is difficult. If we broaden this, not only is it hard to change your own habits, but think how difficult it is if you're trying to change the habits of many people at the same time. The people in your department, or if you're higher up, the people in your division. So it's not just changing your own behavior, but it's changing other people's behavior as well. So the point of all this is the reason people ignore goals or show low levels of commitment and don't spend time in the goals is because change is difficult or change is hard. So that's the first reason why execution is so challenging. The second reason is that there's an inherent conflict between work and goals. Work is important, work is urgent, work acts on you, it's habitual, and it keeps the engine of the business running. Goals, on the other hand, are not important. They are not urgent. You act upon it, and it requires change, and it builds capabilities for the future. So again, there's an inherent conflict between work and goals. Work is going to happen every day, even if the organization does not identify its most important goals. So work's going to continue, even if the hospital or the organization doesn't identify. These are our top 3 goals. Goals, however, will not be accomplished if we spend all our time in work. Work is what we call the whirlwind of everyday business. It's the ongoing stuff that we have to do every day, that we have to do, that we get done, that at the end of the day we can say we did all these things, but did we actually do something towards the strategic goal? Work is that whole whirlwind. An analogy or a way to think about it is think about yourself if you were caught in a snowstorm and you got snow swirling all around. This is work. This is the stuff that's swirling around. The goal, however, might be the Starbucks sign you see down at the end of the road, which has warm coffee or a hot drink for you. So that would be the goal, is heading towards that Starbucks sign, whereas the work is the snowstorm that's swirling all around you. Goals require a commitment, it requires a focus, and it requires us to change. And again, like I said, at the end of every day, we've done a lot of things in our day, our 8 hours at work, our 10 hours at work, or 12 hours at work, but have we done the most important things? And that's what we're talking about today. Have we spent time on the most important things, that being the goals? So there is 4 breakdowns in communication. The Franklin Covey organization, they surveyed 20,000 people at all levels of the organization, and they found that there are 4 basic reasons for breakdowns in execution. 1, people don't know the goal. Secondly, people don't know what to do to achieve the goal. Thirdly, people don't keep score. And lastly, people are not held accountable. Now think about it in your own department. If you're a department supervisor, manager, director, or higher up, if you ask the people in your department if they know the hospital's goals, would they be able to say yes? And let's say they do. Let's say they say yes. We know one of our hospital goals is increasing patient satisfaction. Do they then know how the hospital is doing towards that goal? Do they know what the hospital score is on, for example, the Press Ganey or patient satisfaction scores? And second to that, do they know what specific actions they can do to impact the goal of patient satisfaction? And lastly, are people held accountable to the goal? So for those of you that have a cafeteria in your organization, the hospital, let's say you went in today or tomorrow and you're going through the line in the cafeteria and you have the frontline cook or the person serving you some food. So in addition to ordering your lunch, let's just say you're making some conversation with this person. You say, excuse me, just as a coworker with you, I just wanted to know, do you know what the hospital goals are? The person may or may not. And they may. They may have seen a lot of literature about it. They might have read about it. They may be well informed. And they can say, yes, I know that we're focusing on retention this year. I know we're going to reduce overtime this year. Then you can say, well, do you know how we're doing on that? Or do you know what your specific actions or your specific job responsibilities, what are the things that you do that actually impact the goal? And that's what we mean about the 4 breakdowns in communication. People may not know the goal. They don't know what to do to achieve it. They don't keep score, or they're not held accountable. And again, that would be might be a good exercise to do with just people within your own department. So let's talk about discipline. What is discipline? We said earlier that execution is the discipline of getting the most important things done. And discipline is a constant regimen that leads to a freedom of action. It's easy to get things done. Again, most people come to work each day and they get all kinds of things done. But because there's so much going on at work in any given day, it's really difficult to get the most important things done. Getting the most important things done requires a consistent regimen. For example, again, using patient satisfaction because most hospitals are focusing on that. Every department might be focusing on patient satisfaction. Some departments might be focusing on census or overtime when people are calling out. But do we know, or do we put in place the actions that we know are going to impact that goal every day? My wife and I were watching a show, and some of you may have seen this the other day. It's called Income Properties. And on this show, what they show is people that buy a house that's big enough where they have another part of the house that they can renovate, or they plan to renovate, and use that to rent out and get income, thereby reducing their mortgage. And they go into this with a lot of great ideas, a lot of great plans, a lot of great energy, but they don't accomplish that goal. And they ended up calling in other contractors to come up with ideas and actually get it done. And the reason they don't get it done is not because they don't have good ideas or good intentions. It's because they don't have the constant regimen to work on this project day in and day out to get it done, so they end up getting someone else in to do it. So that's what we mean by discipline. The consistent regimen, those actions that we do day in and day out, or at least every week, that moves us towards accomplishing our goals. The focus, again, for this afternoon is going to be the 4 disciplines of execution, focusing on the wildly important goals, acting on the critical few elements that are going to help us achieve those goals, keeping a compelling scoreboard so we know and our employees know how we're doing, and lastly, creating a cadence of accountability so that there's personal and team accountability to accomplishing the goal. So again, discipline 1, focusing on the wildly important. The enemy of what do we mean by the enemy of the good is the enemy of the great is the good. The reason we have so few great schools is because we have many good schools. The reason we have so few great hospitals is because we have a lot of good hospitals. So people find a balance, or they settle in the good area, not necessarily in the great. If we want to be great, we have to set the bar, or set the vision of what great means. And it might be, for example, being the employer of choice, or achieving the top box scores in HCAHPS. So the real enemy of greatness is complacency, and the only way to overcome it is to help people get clear and committed around where they are today and where they want to be in the future. Other goals hospitals have achieved would be maybe being designated a magnet hospital, or winning the Malcolm Baldrige Quality Award. So it's setting our sights on the highest goal we can achieve, and that is and then moving towards it, which separates our hospital, or our organization, from being just a good organization to being a great organization. Again, I'm going to be using the term this afternoon, wildly important goals. Your own organization may have a different terminology for that. It might be a key result area, a key measure, or strategic goals, but we're going to be using the terminology this afternoon of wildly important. So highly effective individuals are totally clear on their, again, wildly important goals. They have a narrowly focused and well-crafted goals. I'm going to introduce a model to you this afternoon. It's called a See-Do-Get model. So how we see the world determines what we do, which in turn determines what we get. So when we see things differently, we end up doing things differently, and when we do things differently, we get different results. For example, let's take a sports team. They may be playing another team this weekend, and they're an underdog. However, if they approach it how they see it, as we have a good chance of winning, that's going to determine what they do, which is they'll practice all week with a high level of execution, which in turn creates what they get, which is a high level of performance, and therefore they may actually win and pull the upset. For those of you that are parents, think about if you have younger children, or when they were younger and they were misbehaving. How a parent interprets that behavior of the child determines what they do, which in turn determines what they get. So if they interpret the child as being tired versus testing limits versus being hungry, they're going to act differently, and the child's going to respond differently. So this model we're going to talk about this afternoon as we look at the 4 disciplines. See, do, get model. The old thinking is that we can accomplish 6, 8, or even 10 important goals at once. The new thinking is I can accomplish only 1, 2, or 3 important goals with excellence. And when we think that way, or when we see things differently, what do? We focus, we define our wildly important goals, and therefore we laser focus on our top priorities. And this is what we mean about seeing things differently, doing things differently, and therefore getting different results. So let's look at the power of focus. The Franklin Covey Group interviewed the top executive who boasted of his ability to multitask. He said that he could easily accomplish 11 to 12 goals in any given week, that he was just that adept at multitasking. How many goals do you think he actually achieved with excellence when he focused on 11 to 20? He actually got none of those done. So then he tried to cut back and focus on 4 to 10. How many goals did he achieve with excellence? Only 1 to 2. However, when he only focused on 2 to 3 goals, he actually achieved 2 to 3 goals with excellence. So the point being, we can only do so much in a given day. We can only focus so much attention in specific areas. If we focus it in the 2 to 3 top priorities, we will actually achieve those with excellence. And this top executive became a strong believer of that. So he narrowed his focus and brought that whole idea to his company, is if we want to achieve goals with excellence, move our company from good to great, we need to focus on just 2 to 3 at any given time. It doesn't mean, as most of you know, that you only have 2 to 3 goals. If you're a department manager, director, supervisor, you have many more than that. But if you're only focusing on 2 to 3 at a particular time, you can achieve them with excellence. If you try to focus on all 4 to 10 or 11 to 20 of them, you can see your results with excellence is going to be much, much less. So what is an important goal? An important goal is a goal with significance and value. A wildly important goal, however, is a goal that makes all the difference. Failure to achieve this goal renders all other achievements inconsequential. So let's take an example of that. The TSA. What are some of the TSA's goals? Well, it could be customer service. It could be helping people out. It could be helping lost visitors. It's getting people back to their destination. Those are those important goals for the TSA. But what's their wildly important goal? Think about it. Their wildly important goal is to keep planes safe. They want to ensure that there are no terrorist activities on the plane. That's their wildly important goal. That's their WIG. Another example, ED, emergency department, or emergency room triage. What are some of their goals? Well, they want to have good customer service. They want to attend to people quickly. But their most important goal is what? Keeping people alive. So I know if I were to have a heart attack or I went into the emergency room and I was holding my chest, I want to make sure they're doing their wildly important goal of making sure that I'm going to come out of there safe and feeling fine, and not necessarily all their important goals of maybe making sure they're, ensuring my confidentiality or they're giving me great customer service and all the other things. I want to make sure they keep me alive. So again, there is a significant difference between an important goal and a wildly important goal. There's another example I use when I have taught a graduate course in hospital management. And I would give the class the assignment of taking over a hospital. And the hospital has poor physician relations. It has low census. It has financial problems, high turnover, low patient satisfaction scores, poor equipment. And I asked them, of all these important goals, if you were taking over as the CEO, what's your wildly important goal? What's the most important thing? Where do you need to focus your attention on first? And they frequently said it was customer service or patient satisfaction. The actual answer is you really need to focus on finance, because without a stable financial base, this hospital is going to fail. They can have great customer service, they can have low turnover, but if they don't have their finances in order, the hospital is going to fail. So again, we need to be able to focus on the wildly important goals. The last example, let's take the example of if you're on a plane flying into a city, you're starting to circle. You see the city lights down below you. You're all excited about landing. Now you know there's an air traffic controller monitoring all the planes, and he has a lot of important goals. What do you want his wildly important goal to be? You wanted his wildly important goal to be focusing on your plane and getting your plane down safely. So again, in any given organization, any given department, some of your job responsibility is you have important goals, and you want to identify what the wildly important goals are. So let's talk about line of sight. As you can see from this diagram, the wildly important goals start at the organizational level. They roll down to the department level. They roll down to, as you see, all the WIGs in the bottom. Those are individual departments, and on the bottom line, individual people. So what we want to do is create a line of sight. We want to be able to show people at the lowest level of the organization what their actions do to help us achieve our department objectives or goals, which then roll up into the organization's goals. So that's what we mean by creating a line of sight. We said earlier that one of the reasons that people don't accomplish goals is because they don't know them, or they don't think they can impact them. By creating a line of sight, we show how individuals' actions in a given day can impact an overall hospital goal. Let's take the example of the Ritz-Carlton. This is a true example. We have a client who flies into New York City, stays at the Ritz-Carlton, and she says to the staff there, when I come to the hotel, I really like my desk to move from where it is to in front of the windows, because I really like to look out over Manhattan and see the view. And she says also, because of my medical condition, I really need hypoallergenic pillows. So the hotel staff brings her these things. 6 months later, the same person flies into San Francisco and stays at another Ritz-Carlton hotel. Where do you think her desk is? Her desk is already in front of the window. What kind of pillow do you think she has in her room? She has a hypoallergenic pillow. So again, the Ritz-Carlton has taken this level of customer service not just to the one organization or the one hotel, but to the entire organization, so that as customers move from hotel to hotel, people know what their preferences are. So our responsibility as a manager is to create this line of sight. We want to demonstrate how an individual's employees' actions in any given department can affect their overall hospital goal. My team in Learning and Organization Development, we worked with the ICU unit, and they opened up a brand new unit. They brought in a lot of new nurses. It's very difficult to recruit ICU nurses, so their WIGS, their wildly important goal, was retention. And we worked with them about identifying what are the specific strategies that they think is going to most impact retention. And they identified having a mentor and having learning or educational activities. And if we applied that same example to this line of sight, all the people on the lowest row, which is all the people that work in ICU, frontline nurses, knew these two strategies are going to most help our retention rate, which is the next level up, which then impacts the overall hospital retention rate. So again, all this cascading starts at the top, identifying it, but starts at the bottom in terms of identifying what specific actions my department needs to take to then help accomplish our goals, which then accomplish the organizational goals. So where do these WIGS come from? Where do these wildly important goals come from? It can be an organizational directive. For example, a supermarket might say that their wildly important goal is to increase year-over-year sales by 10%. A human resource team might say it's to decrease turnover of first-year employees from 50% to 25%. It might come from a desperate need. An auto manufacturer may say that their wildly important goal is to reduce debt by $7 billion within 5 years. Or a software developer may say our goal is to regain 20% of lost market share in the next 12 months. A wildly important goal might also be a gap closure. You may see a problem or an opportunity in your organization that needs to be addressed proactively. For example, you might say that one of our goals is to increase the competence of new managers from 70% to 90% on key leadership competency measures on their performance evaluation. And lastly, wildly important goals can come from a bold vision. For example, JFK, Kennedy, the president, said, his bold vision was, we're going to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the end of the decade. So again, setting that bold vision. So these are some of the things that we can do, or where organization goals come from. Let's take a minute to talk about how we structure a goal. We want to be able to measure, or our measures want to tell if you have achieved this goal. And it should be written in the format of from X to Y by when, where X is where you are today, Y is where you want to go, and the gap is closed, and we definitely need a when. So for example, going back to Kennedy, his goal was to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade and return him home safely to the United States. Versus a goal, or wouldn't be a really good goal, would be to say we just want to increase United States involvement in space exploration. For those of you that follow Division I football every weekend, now that we're in the college football season, a goal for a team might be we want to be better than last year versus we want to win 10 games this year and go to a major bowl. The first one, we want to be better, is not specific enough. The second one is from where we are, from X to Y by when. So we might have won 6 games last year. We want to win 10 games this year by the end of the season, and therefore attend a major bowl. So again, very specific, X to Y by when. These are some examples of how not to craft a goal. They're too vague. We want to hit our numbers, or we want to turn inventory faster, or we want to increase revenue, or this last one, this is actually from a company, and we want to enable linkage to e-commerce channel strategy scale to the significance for the revenue stream. This was actually a goal from an organization, not healthcare. So again, these are too vague. If someone says, their goal is to travel more when I retire, again, it's not specific enough. It's not from X to Y by when. So these are examples of how not to craft a goal. Again, some more examples. Supermarket, increasing year-over-year sales by 10%, reducing lost time injuries this fiscal year from 12 days to 0, or again, human resources, increase employee satisfaction from 38 to 55 on our culture survey this year. More specific hospital goals, it might be, for example, increasing the number of admitting physicians from 1,200 to 1,300 by the end of the fiscal year, or decreasing overtime costs by 5% by the end of the third quarter. Again, we want the specificity of it. We want to know where we are, where we're going, and by when. It's also important to have a gut check when we write these goals. So what would it mean to you if you achieve these goals, or WIGS? And secondly, how committed are you to achieving these goals? So we want to make sure, we just need to do that gut check. Are people on board with this? So for example, patient access might be setting a goal of 97% accuracy when completing patient registration forms. Or the business office might be setting a goal to increase collections by 5% every quarter. So if you're the manager of that department or area, or the director, you want to ask your people, you want to have a conversation with the employees in your department. Are you on board with this goal? Do you know what it is? Is it the right goal? Does it align with the overall hospital goals? Do you, as employees, know what you can do to impact that goal? And we're going to talk more about that. And lastly, do I have systems in place to hold people accountable? Again, there are lots of goals out there. It's a matter of focusing on what's the most important one. I was in Washington, D.C. a number of years ago at a Healthcare Advisory Board conference, and they do conferences on best practices in a lot of different areas, and this was focusing specifically for HR executives. And they listed and showed the number of different metrics that HR may have. And it was, I think, probably 35 different metrics, things from turnover to days to fill, to worker comp claims, employee relations issues, open positions, number of FTEs, salary dollars there. I mean, there was like 35 different measures. And the question that they put to the group is, with all these measures, do you know what one or two are the most important that are going to help you achieve your overall success? That's what we're talking about, setting up wildly important goals. It's the one or two that's going to get us to overall success. I had an example. Again, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And one of my clients a number of years ago, he came to see me because of he had a lot of anxiety. And we were working about this, and he felt really guilty about taking days off. We were working out some strategies for his anxiety. But in the midst of him, in his first appointment, he says, and also one of the things he wanted to do was he wanted to have a healthier diet. He wanted to eat better, and then maybe even lose weight and get some exercise. And so over the course of about 4 sessions, his anxiety went down. He was feeling more comfortable on his job. He was taking some days off and enjoying himself. But he came in one session, probably about the 5th session, and said, I just don't feel good about this whole changing my diet goal. I just can't seem to do it. And the more we talked, the more he came to realize that that was not really his goal. That was a goal he identified just because of magazine articles he read and TV shows he saw and people he hung out with. Everyone says we need to have this healthy diet. But one of the reasons he wasn't achieving it was because it wasn't really his goal. So that's what we mean about the gut check. We need to do that secondary. Is this really important to my organization? Are my goals lining up with the hospital goals? Do my people know what the goals are, and can they impact those goals? In terms of the gut check, also, we need to be careful about unintended consequences of setting goals. And the easiest way to explain this is to give a specific example. That unfortunately did happen. Many of you may remember that one of Domino's wildly important goals was to deliver a pizza to your front door within 15 minutes. And they set that out. It was on commercials. It was in their advertisement. And unfortunately, there was a tragic accident where on the way to delivering a pizza within 15 minutes, a pedestrian was struck by one of the drivers and killed. So this is an unintended consequence of setting a widely important goal. So it's important as we set these goals that we think through that what bad things might happen if we focus too much on this goal. And of course, Domino's changed that goal to get a hot pizza to your house in a timely manner. So again, unintended consequence, got checks on our goals. So now let's turn our attention to discipline 2, which is acting on the critical few. And you can see the quote on the bottom, 80% of the results come from 20% of the activities. So the focus in discipline 2 are, what are those critical few elements that will help me accomplish my goals? It's the Pareto principle. It's the 80-20 rule. 80% of results come from 20% of activities. So you can see discipline 2, it's within the whirlwind. That circle that you see the 3 disciplines in, that's the whirlwind of daily activities. So again, discipline 2 is acting on those critical few elements that's going to impact my wildly important goal. The Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule, most of you probably heard of it. You might not be really familiar with the origin, but in the late 1800s, an economist, an avid gardener, Wilfredo Pareto, established that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the population. And while gardening, he later realized or observed that 20% of the pea pods in his garden yielded 80% of the peas that were harvested. And thus was born the theory that stood the test of time and scrutiny, which is the 80-20 rule, or the Pareto principle. Those again, the discipline 2 is those critical few activities that best predict the achievement of our goal. So let's look at where our time goes in a given day. On the left-hand side, you can see the results. On the right, or on the horizontal axis is our activities. The square you can see is your workload of activities. So in discipline 2, we're talking about acting on that 20%, which is going to get our 80% of the results, and that's what we call the 20%, or the critical few. So in most situations, small, highly leveraged activities will produce the greatest return. The 20% is the greatest predictor of achievement. And most of us spend virtually every day of the week, every day that we're at work, executing on something. So why not spend it on something good, the 20% that's going to get us to the goals we want? Again, when we think about the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, some other examples are that there are 600 wineries in the United States that produce 100% of the wine, yet only 20% of the wineries produce 80% of the wine. In a grocery store study, 60% of the produce comes from 2 products, lettuce and potatoes. Other examples, the general rule is that 20% of any church congregation donates 80% of their collection. So again, it's that 80-20 rule. If we're going to be busy at work every day, let's spend 20% of our time to get to that 80% of results we want. Just for my own personal example, I'm not really a gardening type of person, so but I do like to have our yard look nice. So if I'm going to do just 20% of my yard work, it's going to be cutting the grass, because just cutting the grass to me is an 80% improvement over just looking at the grass if it's uncut. So again, what are those 20% of activities that are going to get us to 80% of results we want? And that 20% is, again, discipline 2. It's focusing on the critical few elements that are going to help us achieve our goal. So highly effective individuals invest their energies in the few activities. Again, like we said, they have the greatest impact on their wildly important goal. The example I gave you earlier, again, with the ICU nurses, they identified retention as their overall wildly important goal. They were looking for the 1 or 2 things that are going to impact retention the most. It was setting up a buddy system with new hires to get them on board and oriented, and it was also providing learning and growth opportunities. So as they move forward as a department, those were the 2 things they focused on, and actually at the end of the year, they had a 95% retention. They only lost 1 nurse after the first year, and that nurse actually left because her husband was transferred. So again, they identified the 2 strategies they're going to focus on. They kept their focus on that, and they achieved their goal, the retention goal. So again, we're going to look at another example of goals and the critical few elements. In this example, the goal is to lose weight. So by July 18th, this person wants to go from 150 pounds to 180 pounds. The critical few elements they're going to focus on is the number of calories. They're going to work out with a partner, and they're going to introduce some weight training for themselves. So there are a lot of different things that this person can do to maybe achieve their goal of losing those 30 pounds by July 18th, but these are the 3 elements they're going to focus on. So again, when we think about the critical few, it's identifying what are those elements that are going to impact and get us to achieve our goal. Going back to the Kennedy Space Program, the goal was to send a man to the moon and return him safely home. And the 3 elements they focused on, with everything they had to focus on with doing that project, the 3 critical elements was the communication system, because we never sent anyone that far. We had to make sure the astronauts had enough oxygen, and because they were going to be producing a lot of carbon dioxide by breathing. And then we need to have an excellent navigation system that could get the spacecraft away from the Earth's gravitational pull. So again, there were a lot of different elements that went into that, but they had to identify what are the 2 or 3 critical few elements that are going to achieve success. If you think about patient satisfaction, improving Press Ganey scores, or whatever survey you're using, what are the critical elements that are going to impact that goal with all the different things that you can do? For me, this time of year, October, November, I generally train for the Atlanta Half Marathon. So that's my wildly important goal, is to complete the Atlanta Half Marathon, which is 13.1 miles, on Thanksgiving morning in less than 2 hours and 12 minutes. So with all the different activities I can do, I focus on just 3. I want to increase my baseline mileage from 3 miles anytime I run during the week, which I would do during the summer, to 5 miles. Secondly, I want to have a longer run every week, and I want to make sure I run 4 times a week. Now, if you ask other athletes training, they might work out with a group of people. They might sign up for a program. They might use a personal coach. They might focus on doing sprints to get a faster time, or getting more sleep, or eating more carbs. There are a lot of things you can choose from, but we want to focus on the critical few. So those are just some examples. When we talk about critical few, I also want to talk about leading and lagging indicators. And you can see by the definition, a leading indicator is something you can impact and still make a course correction before you reach your goal. A lagging indicator, however, you've already reached your goal and you can't course correct. So for some examples of that, again, when I talked about what I like to do is running. So if I run a 5K race, and I see my time as I cross the finish line, that would be a lagging indicator. That's my time for that race. I can't change that race time anymore. If I know what my splits are at every mile, I can either adjust my pace and go faster or slower to get to the goal I want. If you think about your department budgets, if you track your expenses every day or every week, that's going to impact your goal of managing your department within budget. If you just look at your budget statements at the end of the month, that's a lagging indicator, because by then it's already occurred and you can't impact it anymore. Again, with Press Ganey scores, if you're doing things every day that's going to impact your Press Ganey scores, those are leading indicators which you can change. The lagging indicators, if you just look at it at the end of the month. So the old thinking, again, going back to our see-do-get model, is that we react to the urgent and try to do everything. The new thinking is we focus on the critical activities that best predict and lead to the achievement of our goal. So we analyze, we identify, and we act on those 80-20, the 20% that's going to get us to 80% results. And what do we get in return? We achieve our strategic goal. So again, our see-do-get model, if we see things differently, we do things differently, we get a different result. So this is what we call the 80-20 analyzer. And what we're trying to do is look at all our candidate activities. We're going to narrow them down to the 80-20, the 20% that's going to achieve our results, and then that's the critical few we're talking about. So we have barriers that get in our way, we have pockets of excellence, and we have brilliant and creative. Whoops, let me go back a slide. So when we look at this slide, we see all the candidate activities on top. We start off by brainstorming. We then narrow it down to just the 80-20, and those become our critical few elements. Oops, sorry. This is another way to look at the same thing. For those of you that might like it, doing more of kind of a creative approach, each of these lines represents either something that's brilliant and creative, it's a pocket of excellence, or it's a barrier. So what is the barrier? So when we talk about barriers, these are the obstacles that could hinder me from achieving my wildly important goal. Pockets of excellence is what are best performers doing. This is best practices. And brilliant and creative is just things outside of the box. So barriers you can pretty much identify as, what kind of people or resources or money that must space or any kind of resistance that's going to get in the way. Pockets of excellence, what are the best people doing, what are the best practices. And brilliant and creative is really thinking outside of the box. Examples of that, again, with the Ritz-Carlton example I gave earlier, they used the tracking system so that they knew what the most important needs of their customers were from hotel to hotel, adopted from FedEx. FedEx has a really good tracking system. The Ritz-Carlton adopted that. GE was really big a number of years ago with using Six Sigma and Lean. Hospitals have used that to decrease error rates, especially in things like labs. Hospitals have also pulled from the airline industry. If you think about your hospital, if it uses a pause in the OR where everyone checks in with who everyone is, what their role is, do we have the right person, the right procedure, the right limb, that all came from an airline industry because the airline industry looked at plane crashes and they found out that there's a dynamic that goes on in the cockpit where people do not speak up or challenge the co-pilot even if they knew the plane was going off course and maybe crashing into a mountain. So they have now what's called crew resource management training, so everyone has a voice in the cockpit, and hospitals have adopted from that. So that's an example of brilliant and creative, pulling from different industries. So let's talk about next about keeping a compelling scoreboard. That's discipline 3. People play differently when they know they're keeping score. So what are some of the things, if you think about a scorecard or a scoreboard, what are some of the things that make it compelling? And if you're in a group of people, you might be, just exchange some ideas. What are some of the things that make a scoreboard or compelling? Generally, people will say some of the things are that the scoreboard needs to be specific. It also needs to be visual. It needs to be something I can see. It also needs to be visible, meaning it needs to be someplace I can see it easily. And it needs to motivate people to change, and it needs to give immediate feedback, and it displays our current performance or how we're doing. It gives information easily and simply. We know where we are. We know where we want to go. Think about if you attend an athletic event. What's the purpose of the scoreboard in an athletic event? It tells you if you're winning or losing. Or if you think about ever arriving at an athletic event and not necessarily knowing the score, or the scoreboard might not be working. I had that happen one time. I went to a high school football game a number of years ago, and I walked in late, and I had no idea who was winning or losing. The scoreboard wasn't working. So the importance of a scoreboard, it tells us if we're winning or losing. And we need to think about that in terms of, how people play. Do you think people play differently if they're keeping score? Well, they do. If you look at kids on a playground, you can see that they generally play differently if they're keeping score. There's a higher level of intensity. People are yelling out the score. They might be calling out the, if it's a basketball game, they might be saying 10-8. They might be saying 8-4. If it's a baseball game, you hear people calling balls and strikes. So again, people play differently if we keep in score. Think about your own organization. Have you ever had a meeting with your boss, with your director, with your vice president, with your manager, and they said, this is what your overtime rate has been last quarter or last month. this is the goal we have and this is how much we have allocated in our budget. Do you start thinking differently about overtime? Generally, yes. So again, those things that we focus on, we're going to change do differently. And the way we focus on it is by having a scoreboard. Again, you might be focusing on your census if it's low. You might be looking at your turnover number if you have a lot of turnover. If you're a human resource department, it might be days to fill. So again, with the scoreboard, we know how we're doing, and we can then make adjustments and do things differently. So highly effective individuals know at every moment if they're winning. They know the score. Again, if you're a store sales manager for a grocery store, it might be year-over-year sales. It might be if you're a factory, injury loss reports, that's really big, people getting injured at work. If it's a personal goal to lose weight, you know how you're doing so that you can tell if you're getting closer to reaching your goal. So again, highly effective individuals, they know how we're doing at every moment. They know if we're winning. So again, if we look at where discipline 3 is, again, it's within the circle. And as I identified earlier, the three disciplines within the circle, focusing on the wildly important, acting on the critical few, and keeping a compelling scoreboard, they're all inside that whirlwind of activities. So discipline 3, the scoreboard is as well, but you can see it's behind 1 and 2 because we need to keep score because people do play differently when they're held personally accountable and keep score. So Jen Stewart says the fundamental purpose of a scoreboard is to motivate people to win. So let's talk about personal scoreboard. I'm using a couple different terms, scoreboards and scorecards. So let me just identify those terms. A scoreboard is something for the entire organization or for your entire department. So for example, your hospital may, again, because a lot of hospitals focus on patient satisfaction, they may have a scoreboard that shows how you're doing overall on patient satisfaction. They may have it posted up where you know what you're doing on the Press-Ganey scores, or secondly, a lot of hospitals focus on retention. So they may have a scoreboard that you know how the whole entire organization is doing on retention. Then you move down to the department level, and you also have a scoreboard. So you may know how your specific department, be it med-surg or a maternity floor or lab, you may know how you're doing on the overall score of retention or patient satisfaction. Now, a scoreboard is different. A scoreboard is your own personal, what are the things you're doing that are going to impact the scoreboard. So the scorecard is your own personal way of keeping track of those specific activities and we're going to talk about this in Discipline 4, that are assigned to you that roll up into the scoreboard. And it might help if I give you an example of this. I had a conversation recently with a human resource recruiter, and she was talking about days to fill, and she says, yeah, I'm really trying to get people in for interviews. You know, I'm trying to get this position filled by the end of next week because it impacts the overall hospital's goal of days to fill. Now, her personal scorecard was the number of people she saw that week, the number of positions she was able to fill. That's her personal scorecard. The overall Human Resource Department scoreboard was days to fill, and then that rolls over to the whole hospital retention strategy. So again, scoreboard is specific, scorecard is for the entire organization or for the entire department. So what's the point? The point is you're not really serious unless you're keeping score. I used to work with a director of the business office, and he said he got a call every day from the CEO, and the CEO asked him 3 questions. He said, the CEO called and says, how much have we collected today? How much do we have outstanding? And how much do we think we're going to collect by the close of business? So those were his scorecard issues that fed up into the overall financial scorecard. So again, you're not really serious unless you're keeping score. So let's use a baseball example. Some of you may or may not know who George Brett is. George Brett was the great 400-plus hitter, which is a very high average for the Kansas City Royals. And he was once asked what his batting average was at that moment in time. And he said to the reporter, "I have 169 hits and 450 at-bats. My batting average is 375 today. And in today's game, if I go 3 for 4, which means I get 3 hits out of the 4 times I'm up to bat, it will go to 379. And the reporter just kind of looked stunned, and the reporter questioned him and was just astonished that George Brett had such a command of the mathematics and questioned him on that. And George replied, "It's not unusual. All 350-plus hitters in the league can tell you what today's performance will mean to their overall batting average. If you ask other hitters their average and what they need to do to move up a point or down a point, they might not know. High performers, however, know the score." So again, we know the scores of those things that are most important to us. If you're someone with high blood pressure or diabetes, you generally know what your score is related to your blood pressure or your sugar content because it's important to you. You keep track of that. It's an important goal. Lou Holtz, who was a former head coach of Notre Dame and now a sports announcer for ESPN, he once wrote down his 100 goals of his lifetime. And at one point, he was a coach for another Division I school, and he said one of his goals was to be the head coach of Notre Dame. But he didn't really see that out in his horizon, but he wrote it down as a goal. And when he signed his contract with this other team, he said, "I'll stay with you as long as you guys want me. I will be here every year. I will not be looking for a job. However, I asked for only one clause in my contract, and that clause is if the Notre Dame job becomes available, and if they talk to me about it and offer it to me, I would like to take it." And that was the only clause in his contract. And they put it in, and eventually, about 3 years later, Notre Dame called. They interviewed him, and he eventually was the coach for Notre Dame. So again, he was very clear about what his goal is and what it took to get to his goal. So again, high performers know the score. They know where they are. They know where they want to go. They know how they're doing on any given day. Again, hospitals, lots of scoreboards: patient satisfaction, retention, quality scores, joint commission scores, admissions and discharges, census, staffing, overtime, FTEs. We have lots of scoreboards in hospitals. So people disengage when two things happen. They don't know the score, or they don't feel like they can affect the score. Think about your own team, the people within you in your own department. So if we're responsible for a group of people, the two things we want to do is we want to make sure they know the score, and we want to make sure they know what they can do to affect the score. So, and affecting the score will increase engagement, and people that are engaged are generally going to help you accomplish your goals. So the old thinking was, everyone knows how we're doing on our goals. The new thinking is, we're only serious about our goals when we start keeping score. So earlier we talked about that only 15% of people in an organization know what the score is. That's only 1 in 6 in your department. So if you have a department of 6 people, only 1 of 6 actually know what the goal is. And we said earlier that only 19% of the people that know the score are passionately engaged in getting the goal done. So that's only 1 in 5 of the 15% actually are engaged in getting the goal done. So that's a really low number. I mean, think about your own department. If only 1 in 6 know the goal, and of those people, only 1 in 5 are passionate about it, the likelihood of you achieving that goal is very low. So, our goal as managers is to get people engaged in the goal. And one the ways we do that is letting people know what the goals are, letting them know how we're doing with them, how they can impact it, and then holding people accountable. So again, the old thinking, everyone knows how we're doing. The new thinking, we're only serious about our goals when we start keeping score. So what do? We build a compelling scorecard, a board, and we hold ourselves to a personal scoreboard. And what do we get differently? We get high engagement, motivation, and a quick course correction. Think about yourself. How many of you know what your Visa balance is? And how many know what you can do to impact that? And, those of us that may say that that's an important goal, we might track it online so we know that we can course correct during the course of a month before we get the statement and see how big it is. I've had numerous, this is kind of a humorous story, but as a counselor, I've had numerous parents come in and tell me they were shocked when they got their cell phone bill after they got their child a cell phone with, a certain number of minutes, and they exceeded it. They didn't track the number of minutes that were being used by their son or daughter, and then they waited till they got a bill, and they were just totally surprised and shocked. So again, it's a matter of keeping track of those things that are important to us, making course corrections, and then helping achieve the goal. Again, we use the examples of high blood pressure, Weight Watchers, diabetes, all ways that we keep track of how we're doing on our goal. So what are some of the criteria for building a scoreboard? We want to make it simple. This is a simple scoreboard. You may be familiar with it. It's the dashboard of a car. And you may be familiar with the one scoreboard right there, which is your speedometer. And this is one that allows us great course correction. So, for example, you might be going to work. You're on an interstate. The speedometer is up around 72. Traffic's moving fairly good. You think you're going to be to work in plenty of time. And then as you crest a hill, you see a police car over on the shoulder with a radar gun. What's going to happen to your speedometer and your foot on the gas pedal? You're going to back it off. Why? Because you got some immediate information from the police officer on the side of the road. You looked at your speedometer. You saw it was at 72. You know the speed limit is 65. And what do? You course correct. So this is an example of a simple scoreboard. A simple one for runners is taking a look at your watch at every quarter mile if you're trying to beat a certain time in, for example, a 5K or 3.1 mile run. So simple. Scoreboards need to be simple. They also should be visual. I mean, another criteria would be that they're visual, as well as I said earlier, visible. They're where you can see them. The one in the lower right-hand corner you're familiar with. You've probably seen it lots of times if you participated in or your organization did on United Way campaigns. It's easy to read. You exactly know where you are. You know where you need to go. Generally with graphs like this, red is not so good, green is better. So these are visual, easy to read, easy to interpret. If you have a USA Today around, or if you look at one in your hospital before you leave work today or tomorrow morning, look at the front page of the USA Today. They are an example of an organization, a newspaper that uses lots of scoreboard. Simple graphs, easy to interpret. You don't have to read a lot of the story to know exactly what's going on. So scoreboards that are visual and visible. You don't want it hidden in the back area where no one can see it. You want a scoreboard that tells you immediately if you're winning or losing. Look at these. The smiley face, quick symbol, you know you're doing well. The sad face, we're not doing so well. You can see what the targets are. It's kind of hard to see the targets on the red ones, but it's 6.6 out of 9. The one in the middle, 7.3, you're doing so-so. So again, it immediately tells you if you're winning or losing. So you can see the middle one now. And those, again, a little bit better picture of that. Immediate feedback. Your scoreboard must also focus on the critical few. And in this picture, what I want you to focus is on that lower part of the rudder that's called the trim tab. The trim tab is a small section of the rudder which changes the direction of the ship. Just by changing that small red piece, it's going to change the bigger rudder, which is going to change the direction of the ship. The point of all this is that trim tab is that 20% that's going to get you the 80% result. So, for example, training for service in my department, we needed to identify what were the 20% of the critical few activities that were going to predict how much training we did or what kind of training we did in service. It's that trim tab. It's that small 20% that's going to get you the results you want. A true example is of a teacher that took over a school, poor performing school. The children frequently came there somewhat unkempt, somewhat dirty through no fault of their own. I had difficulty studying. The scores were not too good. The overall condition of the school was not good. A lot of graffiti on the wall, older equipment. And they brought in this new principal, and she decided she was going to be the one person. She was going to be the trim tab. She was going to be the 20% that was going to turn this school around. And she started out by cleaning the school. She actually started by cleaning the restrooms so they were cleaner, they smelled better. Then she started focusing on the graffiti. Other people got involved. It wasn't just the janitors. Other teachers got involved. The students got involved. Eventually, she had so much energy behind this, again, starting out just herself as that trim tab, that the entire school was participating in it. They actually did a fundraiser. They raised enough money to get a washer and dryer there. They allowed people, they actually washed some of the kids' clothes and had extra clothes that people brought in that they could give to the kids. So the whole atmosphere of the school changed. People were excited to work there again. They were proud of what they were doing. The kids felt good. They performed better, again, based on just what this one person started. So again, the trim tab is that small percent, that 20% that's going to get you to the goal. Another example, this is a true story too, is from New York City. And I believe it was when Mayor Rudy Giuliani was there. And he was concerned about all the crime going on. So his 20%, he said, we're not going to send any subway cars out there with graffiti. And there's a lot of graffiti on the subway cars. So every evening, when the cars came in, they would wash up and send out their subway cars. They would wash and clean any subway car that had graffiti on it. They would only send out clean subway cars. That was their 20%. That was their trim tab. Eventually, the subway cars were much cleaner. They didn't have to clean as much, and there was a lot less crime on the subway. So again, it's focusing on that critical few. So again, in summary, we want it simple. We want it visual. It should immediately tell us whether we're winning or losing. And it should focus on the critical few. And when we work with departments, scorecards can be fun. They all don't have to be an Excel graph with or an Excel spreadsheet that's then converted into some type of graph. For some departments, that works well. But there's a lot of we've worked with many departments, and they've come up with a lot of creative of things. We had a emergency department. They were tracking wait times in the emergency department before they got up to the floors, and they had small ambulances on a board keeping track of time. The maternity unit had bassinets tracking how much time the babies were in their room before they got to join the mother and baby in the room. So they had small bassinets keeping track of time. Environmental services, they had a cutout they made of a cleaning cart, and they would add different instruments, from a dustpan to a broom to a mop to just different instruments every time they cleaned the room to see if they could clean a room in a certain amount of time. Engineering, being engineering, they built a scorecard. They hooked up a battery to it. They had little bulbs to it that would light up as they fixed as they did repairs on different pieces of equipment to track how well they were doing in trying to get equipment repaired quickly. So again, scoreboards can be fun when a department creates them versus a manager. When we get people involved, it's just a whole different ballgame. People are much more involved in it. Medical records, they did that when we worked with medical records. Their scoreboard was a medical record with all the different tabs representing accuracy and forms in place and chart breakdown times. So that was theirs. Again, when we work with departments, get creative, ask people for ideas, but again, we want it simple, visual, and immediately give us some feedback on how we're doing. Here's an example of a scoreboard of someone who used to do some consulting with us. His goal was to have 65% of his days stay in Atlanta and do less traveling. You can see by the scoreboard he did really good in some days, but some months like April and May, he was a lot higher and he was out of town a lot. He did a lot of traveling. So again, scoreboards can be really different. This is a personal one. You can have your own scoreboards around. Whatever it is, those goals that you've identified that are most important in your department. The things that are important to you need to be tracked. You need to know how you're doing on these, and it gives feedback immediately. Okay, let's turn our attention now to Discipline 4, which is the creating a cadence of accountability. As you can see from the quote on the bottom, without accountability, there is no commitment. So now we look at Discipline 4, and Discipline 4 is actually on the edge of that circle. It's outside the whirlwind. So Discipline 4 is making sure that we get things done outside the whirlwind, and we're going to talk more about how this happens. Without a cadence of accountability, it's very easy for all the great plans we've created up to this point in time to get sucked into the whirlwind. Right now, nothing is going to be different until we add Discipline 4, and Discipline 4 is adopted and acted upon. We are at risk right now of everything we just accomplished dissipating and going away. So that's why we need to focus on this cadence of accountability. If you look at the metronome in the upper right-hand corner, this symbolizes having a rhythm, and it should be a rhythm within our department of planning and accountability. We have some rest times, we have some busy times, but we need both of those. And so we want to have this rhythm of planning, follow-through, and accountability and reporting. So that's what the metronome represents. It's that cadence of accountability. Discipline 4. So the old thinking, again, going to our see-do-get model, the old thinking was I execute. The new thinking was execution falls apart without personal planning and team accountability. And there's an interesting story here, and this is a true story too, in terms of team accountability and personal planning, is that there's a story in the New York Times about a person who went to work every day for this organization that he didn't work at, and he acted like he worked for the company. He did this for 4 months. No one actually challenged him. He learned the buzzwords of the organization. He knew key people's names, and he just blended himself in. And he just told everyone, if someone said, you know, who you are, he says, well, I'm just Joe, and I'm a project manager from the Chicago office. And no one held him accountable for 4 months. So and this is a true story. So again, execution falls apart without personal planning and team accountability. No one held him accountable for, you know, what he's supposed to be doing there, and he was there for 4 months. He didn't even work there. So when we do things different, when we see things differently, we do things differently. We maximize the time spent on our critical few. We account weekly for our activities. And what happens is we get timely accomplishment of our wildly important goals. So the key question is, what are the 3 most important things I can do this week to impact the scoreboard? The accountability that we're talking about is around this single question. We don't say, what are the 3 most important things I can do this week? We say, what are the 3 most important things I can do this week to impact the scoreboard? The essence of Discipline 4 revolves around that key question. Again, look at the bold words. 3 things this week, scoreboard. This is not the same as determining the 3 most important things in general. Impacting the scoreboard is the key. This is different than what stuff do I need to do this week, because where does stuff reside? Stuff resides in the whirlwind. We need to step outside the whirlwind. The question, what do I need to do this week, focuses on the day job, the whirlwind, the work. The other question, what are the 3 most important things I need to do this week to move the scoreboard, focuses on goals. Remember our earlier slide, the difference between work and goals. This process should be used each week to select and activate key activities that will drive the goals. So again, it's not what are all the things I need to do this week, but what are the 3 most important things I do this week to impact the scoreboard. So what we're going to be talking about is a work compass. You see the 3 activities that this person has identified: set up a wow display, purchase the project, and run the ad. And what does this person do? They put it in their planner. So once we know the 3 most important things I can do to impact the scoreboard, we need to put it into some type of calendar. We can have a color-coded calendar. We can use Microsoft Outlook. We can have a Frankly Covey planner. You might use some PDA or BlackBerry. It doesn't matter what system you use. The key is having an organized, consistent system. Hopefully your system is not a lot of Post-it notes that just keep moving around. The system needs to be organized. Remember, we talked about a regimen, a consistent discipline to arrive at execution. So this one is, those 3 activities get placed into his calendar, her calendar. So let's talk about the time matrix. And some of you may be familiar with this if you've done some of the reading on Stephen Covey's stuff. The time matrix is a tool to maximize our time to get the results we want. It's a framework for managing our time for results. Everyone's work falls into one of these four quadrants. So look at quadrant one. Quadrant one is the quadrant of necessity. This is urgent and important stuff. It's in-your-face stuff. It's crisis. It's stuff you need to take care of right now. It's deadlines. It's Joint Commission calling up or showing up at your door. It might be your child's school calling while you're at work. Or if you have a teenager, it might be your teenager calling at 1 in the morning saying, Dad, Mom, this is my only phone call I get tonight. That's an urgent and important quadrant one activity. If we drop down to quadrant three is the quadrant of deception. It's urgent but not important. These are things like needless interruptions, unnecessary reports, busy work, not having the right people at the right meeting, those kinds of things. You're doing things, but you're not moving towards your goal. Quadrant 4, this is what we call the quadrant of waste or trivia. This is busy work. This is where we have downtime. This is where we're not doing the stuff we're supposed to be doing at work, which is actually kind of interesting. They have done studies, and they found that 85% of e-commerce takes place during business hours. We actually had someone in one of our class who told us her husband listed an item on eBay on Thursday night and had no hits over the weekend, but had lots of hits on Monday morning. So again, we do have some of this waste going on at work. And then lastly, discipline 2 is, quadrant 2 is the quadrant of discipline. This is where goals reside. This is where planning, setting goals, working on those goals, it gets accomplished. So this is some examples of different disciplines, different activities in these different quadrants. Quadrant 1, again, being crisis. Quadrant 3 is we're busy, but we're not necessarily getting the most important things done. Quadrant 4, waste and trivia. Quadrant 2, again, this is where the planning, the training, the things go on that actually help us accomplish our goals. So I want to introduce for you what we call the Devil's Triangle. This is an example, or this is what we call a Devil's Triangle. We start our day in quadrant 1. We get to work, it's early, we're attending to crisis, the people have called out, the high census, the equipment that's not working, the copiers that's broken down. This is the important and urgent stuff. So we spend our time in quadrant 1 when we first get to work if we're operating from a crisis management perspective. Then we do that for, say, an hour, and we drop down to quadrant 3. Quadrant 3 is things that we're doing where we're busy, but it might not be our highest priorities. So we're just kind of catching up with emails and doing some other stuff and maybe filing some papers and all that. And we get tired of doing this, so we need a break, so we slip over to quadrant 4. This is where we're going to rest. We're taking a break. We might be getting a cup of coffee. Might end up spending more time at the water cooler, talk to people than maybe we wanted to, but we're taking a break. And then what happens? We get paged, something happens, another crisis occurs, and we jump back into crisis or into quadrant 1. So we spend our entire day going from quadrant 1 to 3 to 4 to 1 to 3 to 4. And what gets missing? Quadrant 2, the planning, the taking time out to get the strategies in place to accomplish our goal. So every day, everyone works in one of these 4 quadrants based on the urgency and importance of the task. Our goal is to minimize the time we spend in quadrants 1, 3, and 4, and maximize the time spent in quadrant 2. This is where we get our strategic goals done. This is where we get our wildly important goals done. So I introduced this earlier as the work compass. The work compass focuses on those 3 activities that we need to do this week that's going to impact the scoreboard. It's a tool for defining each week's objectives and tasks that we want to accomplish to move the scoreboard. So what we do if we're using a tool like this is we fill out the work compass in preparation for the meeting with our team. And remember, we want to focus just on things that we can do this week to move the scoreboard. It's filled out ahead of time, and we bring it into a meeting. When I was doing this, we actually used this model when I was the director of the Learning and OD team. So each of us would identify, we knew what our goal was to train this class to a certain number of departments by a certain date. That was our X to Y by when. And we broke it down to each of us had certain divisions, vice presidents we were responsible for, and then every week we would meet and we write down these things. What are the one to two to three things I'm going to do this week to help achieve this overall goal? And we would report on it. So it might be making copies of the manual. It might be contacting the vice president. It might be meeting with the team. It might be doing preparation work. Well, each of us identified what if we didn't have the same activities, but I knew what my activities were that I would have to be held accountable for to my team as I met with them every week. So again, this is filled out by every member of the team that they bring in and report on every week. So again, we showed this earlier. It's a matter of putting the work compass into our calendar. And again, we said that the calendar can be, Outlook, PDA, a hard calendar, Franklin Covey calendar. The execution will break down if we don't transfer these activities and actually get them done. If we don't get them done in a time slot that's marked because something else comes up, we need to move it to another time slot so it doesn't get missed. So highly effective individuals regularly and frequently count each other on their commitments. The first of it, again, is we're accounting on the percent of the task that I said I was going to do. Again, what are the three most important activities I can do to move the score this week to move the scoreboard, and what percent of the tasks did I actually get done? Then we're going to update the scoreboard. I've already updated my scorecard. We're bringing it to update the scoreboard. We're trying to learn from the success and failures of each other. How did we do this week? What are some things that we can do differently next week? If there's things I didn't get done this week, I carry it over to the next week. And then this is the accountability session. What are to plan for how we're going to do things next week? If someone didn't get something done, is there something I can do to help out? Is there some resource you need? Do you need me to make a phone call for you? Do you need some help copying manuals? What are the things that I can do to help you plan to get your goals done next week? So this is the whole process. It's accounting for the percentage of tasks that I said I would do. It's updating the overall scoreboard. And then again, it's planning for next week's activities. An example of this is, again, the hospital that I worked with is that the overall goal for the hospital was to move the Proskyny scores up to the 90th percentile by a certain date. And each department has specific departmental goals to do that. And our team worked with the Med-Surg department, and they identified what their key strategies were, what the critical few elements were. And it would be things like rounding on patients, filling out their score, the whiteboard. And then the supervisors would actually round on the staff to see how they were doing with these activities of rounding on patients and asking patients how they're doing and then filling out the whiteboard. When we first started this, we had our first WIGS session, our weekly accountability session, and one of the supervisors did the rounding, but she didn't attend the meeting. So we didn't have her information to update the scoreboard. So what did we end up doing? We put a 0 in because we didn't have her data. Well, clearly the group was not happy with that because this person's data affected the overall scoreboard, which was obviously the scoreboard was a lot worse because we didn't have her information. We added a 0 versus maybe 90%. So the leadership team had a meeting with all supervisors. They re-emphasized how important it is to attend this meeting, that if you're not going to be at this meeting, you need to send a representative to this meeting or call in to make sure that your information is there. And they've been holding these weekly meetings for over 2 years now. Again, the activities have changed, the scores have improved, but they continue to want to be a great organization, not just a good one, so they continue to raise the score and the accountability to each other, and therefore they have different tasks every week. So let's just talk about the difference between a staff meeting and what we call a WIGS session. In the WIGS session, you only have the people there who actually are part of that team, whereas the staff meeting, everyone comes. A staff meeting, the leader hears reports from people on various issues. In a WIGS session, people are held accountable to each other, and the purpose of a staff meeting is really dialogue and communication, whereas the purpose of the WIGS meeting is to move the scoreboard. It's to determine what we need to do to move the scoreboard. An example of this is, and this is a true story too, is that there was this grocery store that was really underperforming. Again, poor store conditions, not good sales. The store didn't look good. Products weren't turned over quickly, and they brought in a young, very energetic store manager to turn this around. And he had been to this class, not with us, but with another group. And he knew about the 4 disciplines of execution. So what he did is he met with the leadership team, the managers in the different departments, and they identified what their goal was going to be, and was going to be increased store sales year over year by 10%. Then they identified what were going to be their critical few activities. And they banked on changing store conditions was going to make things better overall. So they identified what were the critical few elements, discipline 2, which were going to make things better. And each department manager identified in his or her department what it was going to be. So, for example, someone was going to make sure they had fresh bread out daily. Someone was going to clean out their storeroom every week to make sure the older products got moved forward. Someone was going to change over the look of the deli so it was much more presentable as people walked by. Discipline 3, they had a scoreboard. They came in every week and they reported. People got discouraged. They didn't do it every week. So he went back to real basic, simple stuff, and he said, okay, let me just ask you, what's the one thing you can do? Not the 3 things, not the 1 to 3. What's the one thing you can do this week that's going to improve your store conditions? So each of the managers just identified one thing, and they came in and they reported on it. Well, as they did that, they eventually got to the point where they were doing 2 or 3 things, and they had these weekly meetings, which again is discipline 4, the accountability sessions. So they knew how they were all doing, and eventually everyone got on board. They were doing these 2 or 3 things. Store conditions went up, and whereas he thought he was going to just quit this organization and go someplace else, store conditions went up. They hit the year-over-year sales, and he ended up being one of the best performers in the organization, and at their annual meeting was given an award for changing over store conditions. So in summary, it's the 4 disciplines of execution requires us to focus on the wildly important goals, knowing we have lots of important goals, but focusing on the wildly important goals, acting on the critical few elements that's going to impact those goals, so identifying what that 20% is that's going to help us achieve our 80% of results, which is going to then help us achieve our overall wildly important goal. We need to keep score how we're doing. We need to let people know how we're doing, get people engaged, help create that line of sight so everyone knows from the front level employee what actions I have, what actions I can do that's going to impact the overall goal. And lastly, the culture of accountability, because all 3 of those things we can get in place, but if we don't hold ourselves accountable, if we don't hold each other, the people within our department accountable, then all this is going to fall apart. And again, a lot of this information is taken from Franklin Covey's 4 disciplines of execution. If you have any questions now, we have about a minute or 2 that you can call in the question or chat in the question. If not, if you think about something afterwards, you're more than welcome to give me a call at any time or send me an email, and I'll be glad to answer your questions. I sincerely appreciate everyone's time and attendance this afternoon. And again, if you have time for a question, we might have time for a quick question or 2.
Thanks, Pat. And if anybody does have a question, just press * to unmute your line, or you can use the chat box. I'll just ask one quick question. Many people have way more goals than 2 to 3, and I know you recommended 2 to 3 goals is the most feasible. But how do you focus on this 2 to 3 when you have a whole list?
And that's an excellent question because, again, all of you that are in management position, you do have more than 2 to 3 goals. But you can have a list of all your goals, for example, and you can use a system where you use A, B, or C, or 1, 2, or 3, and you list what are the top 2 or 3 goals. And then they may change at any given point in time, but as long as you're only focusing on the top 2 or 3 at that particular time and not trying to do 6 or 7, you will execute those top 2 or 3 with excellence. So again, you'll have a lot. You want to focus on just the top 2 or 3.
Okay, sounds good. Any other quick questions? And again, you can either contact Pat, or if you didn't take his email down, you can contact me for Pat's contact information. And Pat does have one more upcoming help webinar, which is next Wednesday, and the topic is going to be increasing patient satisfaction scores. And then we start our next series, which is on hospital fiscal management, and that's by Eric Schell. And that's going to be more focused towards department managers and frontline staff and holding them accountable, too, for the fiscal management. And that starts on Friday, November 11th. And to register for any of those webinars or to see our complete list of the schedule for this year, you can visit our help webinar registration site. And I do encourage everyone that participated today to take our new online Zoomerang survey for today's webinar. And if you would like ACHE credits, again, you have to take the webinar to receive those credits and indicate that in question 10. To find the survey, you can just follow the link on the screen. Or I also will be sending that link out in an email to those people that registered for this call. And as a reminder, we will be drawing for a book after this webinar call. And I'd like to just thank everyone that participated today and Pat for the great presentation. And if anybody has any more questions, you can feel free to ask them now if you have time, or again, you can contact Pat directly or myself for Pat's contact information. And I hope to have you guys on future calls. Thanks.
Thank you again.